Alright guys, so we're on chapter 11 of Tortilla Flat. How, under the most adverse circumstances, love came to Big Joe Portuguese. Oh, please tell me. Love's gonna come to me. So anyway, chapter 11, Tortilla Flat. How, under the most adverse circumstances, love came to Big Joe Portuguese. For Big Joe Portuguese to feel love was to do something about it, and this is the history of one of his love affairs. It had been raining in Monterey. From the tall pines the water dripped all day. The paisanos of Tortilla Flat did not come out of their houses, but from every chimney a blue column of pine wood smoke drifted so that the air smelled clean and fresh and perfumed. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon the rain stopped for a few moments, and Big Joe Portuguese, who had been under a rowboat on the beach most of the day, came out and started up the hill toward Danny's house. He was cold and hungry. When he came to the very edge of Tortilla Flat, the skies opened and the rain poured down. In an instant, Big Joe was soaked through. He ran into the nearest house to get out of the rain, and that house was inhabited by Tia Ignacia. The lady was about 45, a widow of long standing and some success. Ordinarily, she was taciturn and harsh, for there was in her veins more Indian blood than is considered decent in Tortilla Flat. When Big Joe entered, she had just opened a gallon of red wine and was preparing to pour out a glass for her stomach's sake. Her attempt to push the jug under a chair was unsuccessful. Big Joe stood in her doorway, dripping water on the floor. "Come in and get dry," said Tia Ignacia. Big Joe, watching the bottle as a terrier watches a bug, entered the room. The rain roared down on the roof. Tia Ignacia poked up a blaze in her airtight stove. "Would you care for a glass of wine?" "Yes," said Big Joe. Before he had finished his first glass, Big Joe's eyes had refastened themselves on the jug. He drank 3 glasses before he consented to say a word, and before the wolfishness went out of his eyes. Tia Ignacia had given her new jug of wine up for lost. She drank with him as the only means to preserve a little of it to her own use. It was only when the 4th glass of wine was in his hand that Big Joe relaxed and began to enjoy himself. "This is not Torelli's wine," he said. "No, I get it from an Italian lady who was my friend." She poured out another glass. The early evening came. Tia Ignacia lighted a kerosene lamp and put some wood in the fire. As long as the wine must go, it must go, she thought. Her eyes dwelt on the huge frame of Big Joe Portuguese with critical appraisal. A little flush warmed her chest. "You have been working out in the rain, poor man," she said. "Here, take off your coat and let it dry." Big Joe rarely told a lie. His mind didn't work quickly enough. "I've been on the beach under a rowboat, asleep," he said. "But you are all wet, poor fellow." She inspected him for some response to her kindness. But on Big Joe's face nothing showed except gratification at being out of the rain and drinking wine. He put out his glass to be filled again. Having eaten nothing all day, the wine was having a profound effect on him. Tia Ignacia addressed herself anew to the problem. "It is not good to sit in a wet coat. You will be ill with cold. Come, let me help you take off your coat." Big Joe wedged himself comfortably in his chair. "I'm all right," he said stubbornly. Tia Ignacia poured herself another glass. The fire made a rushing sound to counteract with comfort the drumming of water on the roof. Big Joe made absolutely no move to be friendly, to be gallant, even to recognize the presence of his hostess. He drank his wine in big swallows. He smiled stupidly at the stove. He rocked himself a little in the chair. Anger and despair arose in Tia Ignacia. "This pig," she thought, "this big and dirty animal. It would be better for me if I bought some cow in the house out of the rain. Another man would say some little friendly word at least." Big Joe stuck out his glass to be filled again. Now Tia Ignacia strove heroically. "In a little warm house there is happiness on such a night," she said. "When the rain is dripping and the stove burns sweetly, then is a time for people to feel friendly. Don't you feel friendly?" "Sure," said Big Joe. "Perhaps the light is too bright in your eyes," she said coyly. "Would you like me to blow out the light?" "It don't bother me none," said Big Joe. "If you want to save oil, go ahead." She blew down the lamp chimney and the room leaped to darkness, and she went back to her chair and waited for his gallantry to awaken. She could hear the gentle rocking of his chair. A little light came from the cracks of the stove and struck the shiny corners of the furniture. The room was nearly luminous with warmth. Tia Ignacia heard his chair stop rocking and braced herself to repel him. Nothing happened. "To think," she said, "you might be out in this storm, shivering in a shed or lying on the cold sand under a boat. But no, you are sitting in a good chair, drinking good wine, in the company of a lady who was your friend." There was no answer from Big Joe. She could neither hear him nor see him. Tia Ignacia drank off her glass. She threw virtue to the winds. My friend Cornelia Ruiz has told me that some of her best friends came to her out of the rain and cold. She comforted them, and they were her good friends. The sound of a little crash came from the directions of Big Joe. She knew he had dropped his glass, but no movement followed the crash. Perhaps he is ill, she thought. Maybe he has fainted. She jumped up, lighted a match, and set it to the lamp wick, and then she turned to her guest. Big Joe was mountainously asleep. His feet stuck out ahead of him. His head was back and his mouth wide open. While she looked amazed and shocked, a tremendous rattling snore came from his mouth. Big Joe simply could not be warm and comfortable without going to sleep. It was a moment before Tia Ignacia could move all her crowding emotions into line. She inherited a great deal of Indian blood. She did not cry out, no shivering with rage, although she was. She walked to her wood basket, picked out a likely stick, weighed it, put it down, and picked out another one. And then she turned slowly on Big Joe Portuguese. The first blow caught him on the shoulder and knocked him out of the chair. "Pig!" Tia Ignacia screamed. "Big dirty garbage, out in the mud with you." Joe rolled over on the floor. The next blow made a muddy indentation on the seat of his pants. Big Joe was waking up rapidly now. "Huh?" he said. "What's the matter? What are you doing?" "I'll show you," she screamed. She flung open her door and ran back to him. Big Joe staggered to his feet under the beating. The stick hammered at his back and shoulders and head. He ran out of the door, protecting his head with his hands. "Don't," he pleaded. "Now don't do that. What's the matter?" The fury followed him like a hornet down the garden path and into the muddy street. Her rage was terrible. She followed him along the street, still beating him. "Hey," he cried. "Now don't." He grabbed her and held her while her arms struggled violently to be free to continue the beating. "Oh, great garbage pig," she cried. "Oh, cow." He could not let her go without more beatings, so he held her tightly, and as he stood there, love came to Big Joe Portuguese. It sang in his head, it roared through his body like a great freshet. It shook him as a tropical storm shakes a forest of palms. He held her tightly for a moment until her anger relaxed. In the night in Monterey, a policeman patrols the streets on a motorcycle to see that good things come to no evil. Jake Lake rode about now, his slicker shining dully like basalt. He was unhappy and uncomfortable. It was not so bad on the paved streets, but part of his route lay through the mud paths of Tortilla Flat, and there the yellow mud splashed nastily. His little light flashed about. The motor coughed with effort. All of a sudden, Jake Lake cried out in astonishment and stopped his motor. "What the devil? Say, what the hell is this?" Big Joe twisted his neck. "Oh, is that you, Jake? Say, Jake, as long as you're going to take us to jail anyway, can't you just wait a minute?" The policeman turned his motor around. "You get out of the street," he said. "Somebody come along and run over you." His motor roared in the mud, and the flicker of his little headlight disappeared around the corner. The rain pattered gently among the trees of Tortilla Flat. That's fucking hilarious, dude. Hell yeah. I'm happy for Joe Portuguese. That's funny. And Tia Ignacia as well.